So now that we've got our Bitaxe up and running, which we covered in part 1 of this video, for part 2, let's now take a look at all the different settings and options available to help you customize your Bitaxe and get it set up exactly the way that you want. Now to get things started, again, you're going to want to punch in the IP address that's displayed on the front of the Bitaxe, and it's going to bring you to the web page here, the main UI, where it's going to display all the different stats and allow you to adjust the different settings. Now starting off here on the dashboard itself, kind of like the main page, there's a lot of information here. We've got the hash rate, for example, so the current hash rate that your Bitaxe is actually hashing at. We've also got the expected hash rate that will vary depending on what settings you've got loaded in, how far you overclock, what model of Bitaxe you're using, etc. So this is kind of the expected one, and here is the current hash rate. It will actually fluctuate in time, which you can actually see kind of like some of these fluctuations here on the chart, which we'll get into in just a second. It'll also tell you your current level of efficiency, basically how much power you're using for a set amount of hash rate. A more efficient miner, a newer one with a better chip, is going to require less power for the same amount of hash rate. Older ones will take more power and be less efficient. And then over here, it's going to tell you how many shares it submitted, like attempts at basically solving the Bitcoin block. And it's going to continue to submit shares to the pool like this. You'll also see that there's going to be, over time, some rejected shares. This is totally normal. It's part of the process. Ideally, you're going to want to have this under 1%. Sometimes when you start pushing it too hard, the rejected shares can actually go up. So something to keep an eye on, again, when you start getting into some of the overclocking stuff. And then the best difficulty over here on the side, this is like the best it's ever done at getting really close to solving a Bitcoin block. And then down underneath, it's got a nice chart here, which is going to give you some useful information as far as how your miner is operating. Now, as far as the hash rate, you can see, again, that's displayed here, and it's also going to be plotted here with this solid red line over time. So if we go over one of the dots, you can see there's the hash rate and the time for that specific hash rate. And again, it is going to slightly vary over time. And so for that reason, this dotted line here is going to be kind of the average hash rate that the miner is actually operating at. This is different than the expected hash rate, which it's going to be set to, again, based on your frequency and your voltage. It is going to vary a little bit, and so the actual hash rate that it's achieving is going to be this dotted line here. In theory, it should be very similar to what you see with the expected hash rate. There's various reasons why there might be a bit of a mismatch, which, again, when we get into the overclocking stuff, depending on some of the settings, you might be starving it for power and it's not able to achieve the desired hash rate. So again, we'll get into that kind of stuff when we get into the overclocking. Now, this white line here, this is actually going to be telling you the ASIC temperature. So you can see, like, ideally it's going to be nice and stable when it's hashing. This may vary over time. So like if you've got it maybe set up in the garage, if it's a little bit warmer in the day, the temperature will go up. And then at night when it cools down, it might go down. If you open and close your garage, the temperatures might vary a little bit here too. But this is going to give you an idea as far as like the stability of the ASIC's temperature over time. And then if we scroll down now, we've got a number of additional stats. First, we've got the power that the Bitaxe is using. You can see right now this one's pulling 23.5 watts. The voltage coming in from the power supply set to 5 volts. You will see sometimes with lower quality power supplies, this is going to start to dip to like 4.9, 4.8, 4.7. Again, as you start overclocking more. I have been noticing a lot of manufacturers are now starting to ship with like beefier, more capable power supplies. So again, ideally you're going to want to be sitting here right around 5 volts or so, not dipping down into the 4s. Now the frequency and the voltage, this is the stuff that you can actually configure, which we'll get into here in just a second, that allows you to overclock and basically tell the Bitaxe to start hashing faster and increase its hash rate. And then over here, we've got 2 different temperature readings. We've got the temperature of the ASIC as well as for the voltage regulator. Now the ASIC itself, this is the main chip that's actually doing all of the hashing itself to hopefully solve the Bitcoin block. Ideally, you're going to want to keep this down underneath 70 or so. If you start getting to 70 or more, it's actually going to throw an overheat warning. If the Bitaxe gets too hot and overheats, it'll actually throw an overheat warning and stop hashing until you fix it. And then on the back of the Bitaxes, you've also got a voltage regulator, which can also get really hot. And for this reason, a lot of manufacturers have started adding a second fan to the back of the Gamma specifically to help cool down that voltage regulator. Now, if you're running a Bitaxe Supra, that'll also tell you the temperature of the ASIC itself, but it doesn't have that additional option to tell you the temperature of the voltage regulator. One of the changes that they had between the different models, in addition to having a more powerful ASIC and higher hash rate on the Gamma specifically. And then going back to the Gamma, it can also display the fan speed. These fan speeds can actually vary depending on the temperature of the ASIC. You can set it manually, or you can have it vary automatically, which we'll actually get into here in just a moment in the settings. And then finally, we've also got some pool information down here. It tells you what mining pool your miner is actually hashing to. There's two different pools that are in there. One's a primary and one's a fallback. You can tell if it's connected to the primary or the fallback, and it gives you some basic information here about the pool that you're connected to at this time. Next, if we go over here to the swarm, this is going to be really helpful if you've got a whole bunch of Bitaxes at home. It's going to give you one centralized location to view all of the relevant stats for all of your different Bitaxes. And the idea is you can just hit the automatic scan option. It's going to try and find the different Bitaxes in your network. If it doesn't find them, I found on my network it didn't, for example, you can just manually punch in the IP address of the different Bitaxes and they'll all load up here. And then once they're all loaded, it can tell you the overall hash rate across all of your different Bitaxes. It can tell you how much power you're using with all the Bitaxes. And then it can also tell you the best difficulty that you've achieved across all of your different Bitaxes. Now this is all going to refresh here. All this information, it gets by default updated every 30 seconds, but with firmware 2.4.1, they've actually added this little slider here, which is really nice so that you can actually adjust how often it's actually refreshing things. So for example, if we set it to 10 seconds, we've got a little countdown timer here, and then after 10 seconds, it's going to start to just refresh all this information. Now, as far as the information that it tells you, really handy. You've got the IP address, the name if you've given it a name here for your Bitaxe. It'll tell you the current hash rate that you're actually hashing at, your uptime, how long it's been up and running, how many shares have been accepted, and then also the rejected shares. You've got the power that's being pulled, you've got the temperature of the ASIC, and then if you're running a Gamma, you can see it's also going to display the voltage regulator temperature as well. The Supras, like I mentioned, are just going to be the ASICs. And then you've also got the difficulty, both the difficulty that that miner has achieved for all time, as well as the best session difficulty since it's last been rebooted. It'll display the firmware version here, and then it also has a nice section here to quickly edit some of the settings that we'll go into for the specific Bitaxe, and then you can also restart any one of them or even remove it here from this whole list. And then if we go over next to the network, this is where you can assign the host name like we saw before for each specific Bitaxe, give it a unique name, and then you can also connect it to different Wi-Fi hotspot if you need it. This is kind of where we went for the initial setup stuff to get it connected to your home Wi-Fi, but if that ever changes and you need to update it, you can do it from right here. Then as far as the different settings, this is going to be the primary place where you're going to go to actually configure everything here on your Bitaxe. So we've got a couple things here. We've got two different mining pools that we can set to. We've got a primary as well as a fallback in case something happens to the primary pool. We've got some frequency and voltage options to allow us to overclock the unit and change the hash rate if we want, and then a couple other things at the bottom, which we'll get to in just a moment. Now, starting off with the mining pools, there's two primary ways that you can mine here with the Bitaxe. One is you can solo mine, where if you actually find the whole block, then, well, you get the entire block reward, currently 3.125 Bitcoin plus any fees for this specific block. There's many different pools that you can join. Public pool is a common one that you can use. You can just go right here, publicpool.io. I'll put a link to it down in the video description, and it's going to basically allow you to connect your Bitaxes to a specific pool here. There's no fees that are associated here. Some pools do have some fees. And basically the idea is you can just have it hash here to the pool, and if you find the block, then you get the reward. And then if you want to see any of your stats, you can just punch it in right here and see all your miners and how well they're doing. Now, if you do want to earn some sats, one place that you can do that is going to be with Brains Pool. Again, many different options. I like them just because they're pretty easy to use, and they also will pay out in Lightning. And because with these Bitaxes, you really don't make much. I'll cover how much that is in another video, but it's peanuts as far as what you make. It's really not about making sats. You technically can, but it's not that big of a deal. But if you do want to do it, it's pretty straightforward. You can just go here, sign up, and then just connect everything. And they'll actually pay you out daily over Lightning, which is pretty cool. And so for that reason, I've got it set up here. You can see I've got public pool as the primary pool. And in case anything happens here, sometimes pools go down for maintenance, for weather could knock out the servers, if there's a denial of service attack on the pools. I've seen all that kind of stuff happen. You can also have a fallback pool as well. And then down here, you can adjust the frequency and the voltage. This is where we really start getting into the overclocking stuff. I'll cover all of this in much more detail in another video, but you've got the default settings here for the frequency. 525, again, this will vary by different models of Bitaxes and also different firmware, so we'll sometimes change the default settings. And when you're getting started, it's definitely a good idea just to start with the default settings. You can start to slowly walk up the frequency, and then if needed, you can also start to slowly raise the voltage. But again, I'll get into much more of that kind of stuff in a separate video talking about overclocking. If you're running the Bitaxe maybe like flipped upside down or something, you can actually just invert the display to make it right side up, which is kind of cool. If you want the fan to spin the opposite direction, you can do that. You've also got automatic fan controls if you want, and based on temperature, it's going to like raise and lower the speed of the fan. I like to just run it to 100% because I'm overclocking anyways, but you've got that option. And then if you scroll all the way down, there's going to be options here to update the firmware. So you can see right now I've got version 2.4.1 loaded into the Bitaxe. you can just press the button here to check for any newer firmware versions, and when they're available, it'll tell you what the latest version is, and then you can download it here. There's two different files to grab the firmware. One is going to be to update the firmware of the Bitaxe itself, and then the second file is going to be to update this whole UI here that you're connecting to from the browser. I'll do another video talking about actually several different ways that you can update the firmware, but this is going to be the easiest way, the most straightforward way that most people are going to use. So just download these two files and then update the firmware first, and then you're going to be updating the website next. And then finally, we can go over here to the logs, and it's just going to give you some basic information like, what chip you're running. With the Gammas, they're the 1370, for example. Gives you your uptime, letting you know you're connected over Wi-Fi, what board version you've got. Sometimes for troubleshooting, you can take a look. Here's where it displays the free heat memory, etc. If you want to see any logs, you can also pull those up, and that can, again, be useful for troubleshooting and debugging and whatnot. As it's hashing, it's going to start to display some of the logging information here for you as well. But other than that, that's just a run through here as far as the UI here on the Bitaxe. This is, as you saw, as of version 2.4.1. It is going to change over time. As you saw, we can actually update this UI, and so depending on when you're watching this video, it may actually look a little bit different as new features are implemented or they've made some UI changes. And so with that said, that's a look here as far as the main settings here available in the Bitaxe. Stay tuned for the next video. We're going to go ahead and get into the firmware updates and go over a couple different ways where you can update the firmware, and then we'll also start diving into some of the overclocking options and what you need to know if you want to start increasing the hash rate of your Bitaxe.